For years, Chinese dirt bikes lived in one lane. Cheap, disposable, good enough to learn on, not good enough to race on. That was the deal. You bought a Chinese bike if you couldn't afford a Japanese one, and you accepted the trade-offs. Soft suspension, gutless engines, frames that flexed like pool noodles, and parts that disappeared into a void the moment you needed them. That was the Chinese dirt bike story. Then ZXMOTO showed up with the MX250, and the story got complicated. Who is ZXMOTO? ZXMOTO is a young Chinese manufacturer founded in 2024 by Zhang Xue, and if that name means nothing to you yet, here's the context. Zhang co-founded Kove Moto, built it from 800 units in its first year into one of the most aggressive young performance brands in China, pushed it onto the Dakar stage, and then walked away after a shareholder dispute over how much capital to pour into engine development. He wanted to go further. The shareholders disagreed, so he left, took his initials, Z and X, and started over. ZXMOTO debuted at EICMA 2025 with a full lineup: sport bikes, adventure, rally, cruiser, enduro, and motocross. That breadth signals intent. This is not a company that stumbled into motocross. It's a company building toward a performance brand identity from day one, and the MX250 is the model they're betting on to prove that identity is real. The spec sheet. The engine is a 249.9 liquid-cooled single-cylinder DOHC with a 4-valve head and titanium valves. That architecture, double overhead cam, 4 valves, is standard in serious 250 motocross machines because it allows the engine to breathe efficiently at high RPM, which is where 250cc power lives. More valves means better airflow in and out of the combustion chamber, which is how you make power cleanly at 12,500 revolutions per minute without choking the engine. Bore is 79 millimeters, stroke is 51 millimeters, a short stroke over square layout that favors top-end power over low-end torque, consistent with a high-revving motocross application. Fuel delivery is Bosch EFI with dual injectors. This is not a carbureted Chinese knockoff. Bosch is a Tier 1 automotive supplier. Dual injectors at different throttle positions. A primary low-speed injector and a high-speed injector means the system can vary fuel delivery precisely across the RPM range. Cold starts, altitude changes, and throttle transitions become calibrated rather than approximate. Jetting arguments go out the window. The delivery output is 40 horsepower at peak and 27 newton-meters of torque at 9,500 revolutions per minute, which puts it in the neighborhood of what serious 254 strokes produce. The compression ratio is 13.9 to 1. That is high. High compression raises thermal efficiency. You extract more energy from each combustion event, but it also requires fuel with enough octane to resist pre-detonation, and it demands tight manufacturing tolerances. If the bore-to-deck height is inconsistent across bikes, compression will vary, and power will vary with it. That's a quality control question, not an engineering one, and it's one ZXMOTO hasn't answered yet with volume production data. The gearbox is 5-speed with a hydraulic slipper clutch. The slipper clutch matters for motocross because it prevents the rear wheel from locking or hopping under aggressive downshifts. When you brake into a corner hard and drop 2 gears fast, engine braking spikes. A conventional clutch passes all of that into the drivetrain. A slipper clutch lets the plates slip momentarily to absorb the overrun torque, keeping the rear wheel tracking instead of chattering. It's a feature you'll find on KTM, Husqvarna, and Yamaha's 4-stroke MX bikes. It's not a bonus on the MX250, but a baseline expectation for a bike claiming this performance tier. Now the frame, and this is where the brief gets interesting. ZXMOTO went tubular steel. Not going through aluminum frame is a deliberate choice. KTM and Gas still run steel frames in motocross, and riders argue about it endlessly. Steel flexes predictably and progressively under load, which means chassis feedback tends to be more linear. The bike communicates what the front end is doing before it lets go. Aluminum frames are stiffer by default and require careful engineering to introduce the right amount of flex back into the chassis. Neither is inherently wrong, but in a market where every Chinese bike gets accused of cutting corners, building a steel frame when you could have plastered aluminum twin spar on the spec sheet for marketing points is actually a confident engineering statement. The subframe and swing arm specs haven't been uniformly confirmed across sources, so we're not going to guess those. Suspension is fully adjustable KYB front and rear with 305 millimeters of travel at both ends. KYB is not a name you buy just for marketing. They supply suspension to Honda, Yamaha, and Kawasaki. Having KYB units on the MX250 means the raw hardware is legitimate. Whether the valving, spring rates, and rebound/compression settings are dialed correctly for the chassis is a separate question. Suspension that came from a quality manufacturer can still be misconfigured out of the factory. Claimed weight is around 102 to 105 kilograms depending on the source. Ground clearance is 325 millimeters. Seat height is 960 millimeters. Those numbers put it inside the dimensional envelope of the class. On paper, this bike looks like it belongs on a starting gate. Why the 250 class is the right entry point. ZXMOTO chose wisely here. A 450 would have been a harder sell. 450 riders are racing for championships, their bikes go through abuse that stress tests every weld and every seal, and the trust gap between an established CRF 450R or FC 450 and an unproven brand is enormous. You can't fake credibility at that level. The 250 class is where you earn it. Amateur racers, younger riders, cost-conscious club competitors, these riders are open to something that delivers real hardware at a lower price, especially if it means getting on a capable platform without stretching budget. In China, the MX250 reportedly undercuts the mainstream Japanese competition by around 50%. The 250 also has a lower punishment threshold for small calibration issues. If ZXMOTO can make riders trust the MX250 through 1 or 2 seasons, parts available, engines surviving full motos, suspension working after 50 hours, they have a foundation to move up the displacement ladder. The part the spec sheet can't tell you. Here is where the honest story starts. Motocross isn't about how good a bike looks on a spec sheet, it's about what the chassis does when you brake hard into a flat, rutted corner and the front end loads up. It's about whether the swing arms, suspension, and frame all work together or whether they fight each other. And it's about how the engine responds when you roll on the throttle out of a slow turn, whether it has the torque to drive forward and clear the next jump, or whether you have to rev it hard just to keep momentum. A 249.9 DOHC with high compression and Bosch EFI should have the top end to be competitive, but whether the power delivery is usable, linear enough to manage in rough conditions, strong enough to not leave you short off kickers, requires seat time. The gearbox surviving abuse is another one. 5-speed gearboxes in motocross take punishment, missed shifts, clutch-ups over obstacles, aggressive grabbing off the gate. Chinese transmission manufacturing has historically been the weak point in budget bikes. Machining tolerances, heat treatment on gears, and selector forks, fork spring rates. If ZXMOTO built this to a budget on the internals while spending on the visible hardware, the gearbox is where it shows up. After a season of hard riding. Parts availability is also very key, and it's where Chinese brands have repeatedly failed. You can build a technically interesting bike, but if a rider in Belgium, Australia, or rural Texas blows a water pump seal and waits 8 weeks for a part that may or may not fit, the bike's technical merit is irrelevant. The bike is dead to that rider, and word travels fast in moto communities. The trust problem. But there's new context. ZXMOTO's engineers could build a genuinely capable motocross bike, and riders might still not buy it. Not because of the bike, but because of the flag on the tank. Chinese motorcycles have spent multiple years training buyers to expect cheap castings, soft steel, and unsupported products. That reputation didn't come from nowhere. It came from real experiences with real bikes that failed riders who needed them. Here's what's different now. In March 2026, at Portimão, ZXMOTO's 820RR-RS took back-to-back race wins in the World Supersport Championship. French rider Valentin Debisque crossed the line nearly 4 seconds clear of the field, ahead of Ducati, Yamaha, Kawasaki. For a brand that only launched in 2025, that result is not nothing. It means ZXMOTO can build an engine, develop electronics, and run a race program at an international level. It means someone at that company knows what winning requires. But here's the important caveat. World SSP credibility and motocross credibility are completely different currencies. Road racing rewards smooth power delivery, electronics integration, and chassis stability at high speed on consistent surfaces. Motocross rewards chassis feel through braking bumps, suspension compliance in rough terrain, drivetrain durability under repeated shock loads, and the kind of low RPM traction management that lets a rider pin it out of a muddy off-camber without looping out. The 820RR-RS winning on Tarmac tells you ZXMOTO can build a fast engine and a functional race program. It does not tell you whether the MX250 holds together through a full national-level moto schedule. Those are different tests entirely. Overcoming the trust gap in motocross still requires time at the track, finished bikes in the hands of racers, mechanical breakdowns handled fast, dealers who understand the product and stock consumables, and lap times that close the gap with established bikes rather than expose it. ZXMOTO has road racing credibility now. Motocross credibility they still have to earn from scratch. Why it still matters. If the MX250 proves itself over a real race season, like actual racing in actual conditions, it changes something. It opens a pressure valve on pricing that the established brands have not faced in the premium performance segment. A credible Chinese 250 with real KYB suspension, real Bosch EFI, titanium valves, and a slipper clutch, at reportedly half the price of the Japanese competition, forces a conversation about what motocross riders are actually paying for versus what they could be paying. Chinese brands have made genuine inroads in the middleweight segment, not by matching European and Japanese fit and finish, but by getting close enough at a price point that riders have to do real math. Motocross has been slower to move because the mechanical demands are higher and the cultural identity of the sport is deeply tied to the established brands. Racers ride KTM and Yamaha for a reason. That identity is not easy to displace. But if the MX250 is genuinely good, not almost good, not good for a Chinese bike, but good in a way that riders recognize on the track, it is the first step towards something bigger. The honest verdict. The ZXMOTO MX250 has not earned trust in motocross yet, but it has earned attention. That is a real distinction in this sport. It is the first Chinese motocross bike that looks like it was designed by people who understand what motocross bikes actually need. A purpose-built 250 with the mechanical architecture to back up the claim. But the fact that a Chinese brand is building a bike that forces those questions is new. The MX250 hasn't proven itself. It's asking to be proven. In this sport, that's at least the right question to be asking. Let us know what you think in the comments section, and as always, check the pinned comments for our special offers and stay tuned for the next video.